Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Self-Discovery with me, Jacqueline Steele. Today, I am going to be talking about emotional trauma, PTSD, and what led me to start this podcast. These are subjects that are difficult to talk about, but if you stay with me until the end of this, I promise you that there is hope. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because 2019 was one of the most difficult years of my life. It was when so much childhood pain caught up with me and backed me into a corner, essentially. And I was left really with no other choice than to deal with it or completely stuff my emotions and numb out. And I'm not a person who likes to numb out. And so last year was the first year I ever truly walked through and felt my pain. And the beauty in all of that, without giving the story away yet, because I'm about to read it, is that this process freed me and allowed me to become a deeper, truer, more authentic version of myself. And so in hindsight, though walking through that pain was so difficult, I wouldn't trade any of it for what I know now. And I want to share my story with you. So again, we can continue to have tea together and enjoy each other's company in this podcast and be totally and completely real. My story is a classic one of you just don't know what happens behind closed doors. And again, that's also why I want to share this, because I don't want there to be a veil or a curtain or a facade of any kind between us. I think one of the bravest ways to live is truthfully, and I think we often mask our truth. And I don't want to do that. I want to do what makes me come alive, and part of that is being totally and completely and brutally honest. And I also think that total and complete and brutal honesty is what leads us closer to each other. And so in the name of connection, in the name of authenticity, with the intention of encouraging you, whatever it is you have been through that you are so afraid to revisit or heal from, I want to encourage you and tell you that you are strong enough. You do have what it takes. If you need to get help, you can. But the other side of your pain is where your truest, deepest self is. And so this podcast is called Self-Discovery. And this particular episode is about journeying to the other side of my own personal pain. So here is my story. And if you're watching via YouTube, this is going to be like a children's story time, essentially, where I'm literally reading the story that I wrote. And then if you're listening via podcast, it's just going to be a continuation of what you're listening to already. This story is an excerpt from my ebook, Didn't Break Me. And I also have a song called Didn't Break Me that's on iTunes and Spotify and all of those other places. But this story is the first half of my book, Didn't Break Me. And I'm gonna stop explaining it, and I'm just going to start reading. This is part 1, and it's titled The Lead Up. It was already gone. That shiny feeling you have when you've been working on something and it's finally released into the world. This time, it only took a few days, less than a week before the exhaustion set in. I had been running on low, and I knew that, but this kind of tired was different. It was laced with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. What was that feeling? That buzzing in my belly and tightness in my throat? Anger, stress, anxiety? Whatever it was, I was nauseous with it. It was the middle of October, and I longed for Christmas. For a week where I would be left alone and could do whatever I wanted to and then go on a trip to visit a friend in Dubai. I kept telling myself that it was only a little longer. Just hold on a little longer. Keep going. You can do it. The last 2 years of my life had been a whirlwind. I had been working on music and making it a career for myself for so long that I got to a point where I was ready to give up on it altogether. I had had my heart broken over and over, and I didn't know if I had it in me anymore. I needed distance from it. A way to make some money without the pressure of making it on my deepest passion. So I started a business with a good friend and my brother, who was living with me at the time. We spent months in preparation before launching it. We recorded videos and wrote emails and labored over the website. Then 2 months after opening our digital doors, my business partner's girlfriend died suddenly of a grand mal seizure. It was awful. It was horribly tragic, and everything was put on hold. In the meantime, my husband had also started a business, a real estate investing business to be more specific, and he recruited 2 of his good friends to launch it with. The only problem was they lived in Illinois and California. And before we knew it, what started as a weekend rendezvous ended up turning into a permanent living situation. Within a few days, my brother had left the business and moved out of my guest room into Atlanta, and Sam's 2 business partners moved in and set up launch control. I rebranded and re-released my business as a branding agency, and we were all off to the races. For that entire year, my husband and I had a full house. Some parts of it were awesome. We were all young entrepreneurs, full of ideas and creative ways to approach our businesses. It was fun living and breathing that energy as we all ate together and worked together and hung out together. The other part, the part where I know myself well enough to know that I need a lot of breathing space and time alone, wasn't so great. The pressure of building my business, now on my own without my business partner or my brother, weighed heavy on me. I had put so much time and effort into it at the expense of making my art that I felt like I had to succeed. That, combined with my living situation, started taking a toll on me physically and mentally. I couldn't sleep. Weird things were happening with my body that I couldn't put my finger on. I felt claustrophobic in my own skin. Deep down, I knew I needed to get back to creating, but I had started this snowball of a business, and it was already gaining traction, rolling down the hill. How could I stop it and make my music? Without any clear answer, I decided to do both. I could still run my business and work on my music after business hours. I started recording at a local studio and traded studio time for branding and website help. It was a juggle, but I was starting to feel like I was on the right track. Putting my music on the back burner had only brought heartache when it was meant to bring relief. So doing something about it made me feel better, yet I felt like I was still running on empty. I was burning the candle at both ends, and without adequate sleep, something had to give. Again, I kept telling myself, just get to Christmas. Release Mississippi Sinner to the best of your ability. Then release the other 2 songs, finish strong with your blog and your client work, and wrap up the course content for Start Strong, which was a free 4-part course I started and created. And then you can rest. October 5th, the date set for Mississippi Sinner to release, came and went. The digital distributor messed up the release date, but I forged on. I released the music on my own and sent it out to my email list and to anyone who asked for it. I was committed to following through. The reception was so kind. People seemed to like it, but just as people were catching on, I stopped promoting it. I even had a video for it that my brother and I made on the banks of the actual Mississippi River, but I couldn't hit publish. It was like my gas tank had been running with the red light flashing for so long that the red light broke and the engine turned off mid-ride. I was supposed to release 2 more songs, but I couldn't make myself do it. I had a vulnerability hangover and I just wanted to retreat into the woods. I felt like I didn't have anything left. I was so tired, but if I could just hold it together for 8 more weeks until Christmas, I could take a break. And then, part 2, the realization. In late November, I got the call. It was quite businesslike and matter of fact. Jacqueline, your grandmother fell in the night and broke her hip. She is in the hospital, but she is not healthy enough to be operated on, so we are making her comfortable. Prepare for the end. We will keep you posted. Click. The call ended almost as soon as it began. My grandmother and I were somewhat estranged. After my parents' divorce, she had really disapproved of some of the decisions I had made, and our relationship was never the same after that. Then, as so often happens in life, something I didn't see coming came, and dementia made itself comfortable in her precious little body. We weren't ever really able to discuss what had happened between us. My anger turned to sadness. The last time I had seen her, she didn't recognize me. It was heart-wrenching. My dad's side of the family is Scandinavian. My paternal great-grandmother was from Norway, and my great-grandfather was from Denmark. From what I know, which is admittedly very little, they were hardworking, no-nonsense kind of people. Their pragmatic and religiously conservative ways were passed down to my grandparents and to their 5 children. The result was a crew deeply devoted to God, deeply devoted to service, and from my perspective, deeply devoted to staying quiet about matters of the heart. I always felt a little bit out of place. I love my dad's side of the family. Don't get me wrong, they are a wicked smart bunch with some big and fun personalities. But after my parents divorced when I was 18, it became glaringly apparent that I didn't fit in. I am an empath. I always have been. I feel as deeply as the ocean is vast. It's a huge part of who I am and the impetus behind my art. But in a family where mom is the word, I felt energetically suffocated. It's been a point of tension for many, many years now, and the cause of many, many arguments with my father. You see, I am the apple cart upsetter. I talk about my feelings in a respectful but firm manner because I know that if I don't, I'll become resentful and feel like I can't be myself. Feeling like I can't be myself or that I'm not safe to be myself makes me uncomfortable. And being uncomfortable naturally makes me want to avoid spending time with whomever I feel like I'm not safe to be with. So my antidote to all of this is talking about my feelings respectfully when they bubble up. Sometimes this works beautifully. Other times, not so much. What happened next is one of the latter. My grandmother died. I felt numb. I went to a yoga class and afterward called my dad to see how he was doing and to check in on funeral details. I could tell from the sound of his voice when he answered that he wasn't himself. He was hurting and agitated, and I should have just told him I would talk to him later and hung up the phone. But I didn't, and neither did he. And what ensued was the worst conversation I have ever had with any human being to date. In the span of 20 minutes, almost 30 years of history were lassoed from the depths and brought into the light. I didn't understand what I had done to hit a nerve so acutely. What was meant to be a tender call turned into a chasm the size of the Grand Canyon with my dad and I on opposing sides. I ended the conversation, eyes blurred with tears, saying, "I love you, but I cannot do this anymore. I wish you well." My heart broke that night in a way that I didn't know a heart could break. It wasn't a lost love kind of hurt. It wasn't a missed opportunity kind of discomfort. It wasn't the ache you feel when someone passes away. It was the torturous and slow burn kind of heartbreak you feel when you realize one of the people you love most will never be able to love you back the way that you love them. I wasn't just tired anymore. I felt broken. Just a few more weeks until Christmas. Part 3. The part where I go to the Middle East. I compartmentalized as best as I could. I took the pressure of releasing the 2 other songs I had recorded off my plate and decided to focus my time on wrapping up remaining client work, writing the last few blog posts for the year, and finishing the online course I was going to release in January called Start Strong. I crawled into Christmas break, but I was so proud of myself. I gave every ounce I had left to my work, and I was elated to be done. I spent that off week like a hermit in my house, watching Netflix and reading and spending some quality time with my husband and my animals. It was really nice. Then, on December 28th, I packed my bags and left for Dubai. I'll never forget watching my husband watch me as I inched my way along in the security line. He didn't budge until I was completely out of sight, and something deep inside of me screamed that I should be walking out with him. In that moment, I chalked it up to fear. After all, I was a woman traveling alone to the Middle East, but my sense of adventure won out over my fear. It usually does. And I kept moving. I'm not someone who lives in a state of fear. I never have been. I went solo skydiving at 16. In 2005, at 18 years old, I went to London with a girlfriend right after the bombings happened. Just a few weeks ago at a gas station, I instinctively inserted myself to defuse a potentially harmful situation when I saw a young man reach into his car for his brass knuckles as another young guy approached him. I'm no superwoman, but I'm also no damsel in distress. I had been planning this trip with my friend for almost a year. She was my neighbor when Sam and I lived in California, and she even lived with us for a brief period when she had fallen on hard times. She moved to Dubai shortly after Sam and I migrated to Georgia, and I felt quite certain that she could be trusted. We had been friends for 6 years. Sam, on the other hand, did not trust her and did not love the idea of me traveling with her in the United Arab Emirates and Oman for 2 weeks. She had displayed some odd behavior in the past, yes, but still, I wanted to go. My major in college was international studies with an emphasis in Middle East studies, and I was jonesing to walk on this ancient ground that I had only read about. I also, after everything that had happened in the previous few months, felt like I needed a vacation. I boarded the plane, and before I knew it, I was grabbing a café au lait en Paris before catching another flight to the UAE. It was a long trip, but it was uneventful. Not at all like what I was about to walk into. As soon as I arrived at her apartment, I knew something was wrong. She was vacant. She didn't seem like herself at all, and there were prescription bottles on her kitchen counter. I gently asked her what was going on, and without totally spilling her beans, she confessed that she was going through a really tough time. Her relationship with her boyfriend, the one she had moved to Dubai to be near, was on the rocks, and things at her university weren't going well. At that moment, within an hour of arriving, it was clear I had stepped into something I didn't have the energy to step into. But what was I to do? I was 7,600 miles away from home. I decided to lean in. She needed a friend now more than ever, and I could be that. I could be a shoulder to cry on and someone to hold space for her during this really tough time. That's what good friends do, right? The first couple of days were fine. I had crazy jet lag and was waking up at really weird hours. But we had fun. She told me how grateful she was to have someone around to get her mind off of her relationship, and I had hope that we would get through this and make the best of a bum situation. Then, On New Year's Day, there was a shift. Her boyfriend of 3 years, who had moved her to Dubai and supported her and taken her all over the world, broke up with her in a text message. There was some other seriously crazy-ish that I found out that day, but none of that is my story to tell. What is my story to tell is that her behavior became increasingly erratic after that. At first, it was lost apartment keys and elevator cards, and oh my gosh, I left my passport at the visa office. Then, while visiting a mosque in Abu Dhabi, it became, do you have an internet connection? I don't have one in this underground parking garage, and I can't open my Tesla app, and without the Tesla app, we can't open the car because I lost my key. Then it became angry high-speed driving in a city that uses traffic lights and lines as a polite suggestion. Then it got really weird right after we arrived in Muscat, Oman for the weekend, and we went through customs, and her passport was suddenly gone. She had had my passport a few moments prior, and I politely extracted it from her fingers. Then it got next level crazy on our second day in Muscat, when her anger and frustration rocketed toward me over whether we were on the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Oman. We had barely woken up, and she said the Persian Gulf, and I politely disagreed, and all hell broke effing loose. Sitting in that hotel room in Muscat, listening to her yell at me was surreal. She was screaming over a disagreement about a body of water on a map. There was no reasoning to be had, none. I knew somewhere inside this outburst wasn't really about me, but still it was directed at me, and she was burning with rage. I just remember, in earnest, saying, "Are you fucking serious?" Then, as quickly as she lit up, she suddenly left for a massage. She told me that I could take the rental car and travel around Muscat on my own that day because she had no interest in being friends anymore. I sat on my twin bed in that hotel room stunned. I hadn't even had coffee yet. I was so confused. I started looking at options for changing my flight to get home as soon as possible, but the cost was astronomical. And I was still in Muscat when the rest of my belongings were in Dubai. Hours passed. I didn't know what to do next. I started getting worried about her. I texted, no reply. I texted again, no reply. I texted again. She finally replied that she hadn't been near her phone, but that she was on her way back. I hoped we could reconcile and pull this trip out of the bag, but it got worse. Everything was my fault. Everything. I was berated again and blamed for making her angry. It was such a long berating that I put my phone recorder on as proof. I know that's a little bit naughty, but I didn't think anyone would believe me that this was happening. It was just too bizarre. I called my husband in the middle of the night crying. He told me to come home. I told him I couldn't do anything until I got back to Dubai where my bags were. 24 hours or so after our initial fight, she had cooled off and decided that we could start over. I didn't believe her, but I was willing to do anything to get back to Dubai in one piece. The following day was eventful. I won't bore you with all of the details of everything we did before we were due at the airport, because we missed every tour we were supposed to go on. But it is worth noting that we got lost in the middle of the desert at dusk. Her GPS had stopped working, but she wanted to see this waterfall in the dark, and she was very certain she would remember the way back in a country she had never visited before. My pits are sweating all over again just thinking about this. I berated myself for getting in the car with her that day, but I knew the full berating and self-loathing would have to wait until I was safe. I kept silently repeating, "Just get to the airport, Jacqueline. Just get to the airport." P.S. The irony is not lost on me that I felt more in danger in her presence than I did anywhere else we had been in the Middle East so far. I think of Alanis Morissette from Jagged Little Pill singing, "And isn't it ironic? Don't you think?" After several hours of driving and me sweating, we pulled up to the airport entrance and I kissed the ground. Not literally, but in my head, it was a full-on snog with the concrete. To make a long few hours short, she ended up being detained in Muscat. No passport, no plane. It didn't help that she was blaming the police for not helping her enough. I sat in awe on the tarmac as she was texting me to have a good time in Dubai, and I'll let you know what they say, but I'll probably be here for a few more days. The plane engines started rumbling, and I felt a dichotomous sense of freedom and dread wash over me. What the hell was I going to do next? Then, part 4. The part where I leave the Middle East. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I found myself in her apartment. I called my husband to let him know that I was okay, and I took a bath to wash away the sweat and the angst bubbling inside. He told me I needed to get home, and I told him that I needed to sleep before I could make any more decisions. I was so tired, but I had trouble sleeping. I hadn't slept well at all on this trip. I hadn't slept well or consistently before it either. It's so interesting how when my body needs rest most, I cannot seem to find an off switch. I called the airline I had booked with to change my flight. It cost more to change it than it had to purchase it in the first place. I knew I could charge it on my credit card, but that felt like a trap too. I had 7 days left. Could I do it? I warred with myself. I had been wanting to visit the Middle East for over a decade, and I was here. Was I really going to allow someone else to ruin my time? Looking back, I should have gone home, but you don't know what you don't know, and I have this stubborn undercurrent in my DNA that tells me I can handle anything. So I stayed. And again, looking back, I realized that I can pretty much handle anything, but why would I want to? Why did I continue to subject myself to such volatile behavior? The rest of the trip, shall I say, was a mixed bag. She got back to Dubai and gave me a book she bought at the airport since she knew I loved to read, which was her way of apologizing, and we put it behind us. I was fully on edge those last 7 days, but we did do some really fun things. We went to a karaoke bar at this throwback 70s club in one of the poshest hotels in Dubai. I sang my heart out to Queen's Fat Bottom Girls, naturally, to a room filled with Russian men and gorgeous prostitutes. We went on a desert safari and went dune bashing and four-wheeling and ate food sitting on faded rugs under the stars while a belly dancer twirled in the moonlight. We went to this incredible show called La Pearl that was visually stunning. We toured the many malls Dubai is famous for and has to offer. We went salsa dancing with some of the tallest Arab men I have ever seen in my life. And we had dinner with a table full of expats from all over the world, sharing such amazing stories that I could have parked in that moment, listening forever. My travel companion was still highly unpredictable during those last 7 days, but the outbursts hadn't been directed at me. On my last night there, we went to the Louvre in Abu Dhabi and then ate dinner and smoked shisha, which is hookah, with some newfound friends. On the way back to her apartment, she asked me to stay longer. She wasn't quite ready to face her current circumstances alone. Despite her behavior toward me, my heart ached for her. I listened to her share what she was feeling until 4 a.m. We hugged and cried, and I felt a sense of relief, thinking about being able to go home on good terms. I fell asleep softly and woke up to her raging. At first, I had no idea what was happening, and then as I came to, I realized she was yelling at me. Apparently, I hadn't responded to her friend who wanted to have lunch with me. I had been sleeping. What followed was a diatribe of how awful I am, to which I responded, "If we're going to do this, can I at least have a cup of coffee first?" To which she responded, "How pathetic that you need coffee to have a conversation." That is so pathetic. I let her yell and get it out, and then said, "Why don't you just give me this lady's phone number and I'll contact her directly?" I didn't even have the woman's contact information yet. Then as swiftly as this hurricane of rage began, it left the room entirely. She informed me that she was now leaving for a piano lesson. At this point, I had 9 hours or so until I needed to be at the airport. I quickly took a shower, packed my things, left her a note, and got the hell out of there. I met up with her friend that she was so mad I hadn't responded to, and we had a nice time. I was so on edge from 2 weeks of chaos that it was hard for me to relax, but I tried to make the best of it. Another friend I had met that week kindly took me to the airport. I was going home, but I wasn't the same person I had been when I left. Part 5. The breakdown, the breakthrough, and the part where I write didn't break me. I hadn't kept food down while I was away, not because it wasn't delicious, but because my constant anxiety made me nauseous, and I hadn't slept for what felt like a lifetime. I touched American soil like an empty seashell washes up on the sand. My husband wrapped me in his arms. We drove home, and I was greeted with a hand-drawn welcome home chalk mural and 3 dogs that were so excited I was home they were smiling. I felt relief, but I also felt different. I couldn't place my finger on what I was feeling, but it was just as well because I didn't have time to fall apart. We were on a flight to Kansas City for a wedding within a few days. I tried to be myself, but I was posing. I felt shell-shocked and confused and tricked and betrayed. I had trusted her. Was something deeply wrong with me? Was I a total fool? Were all my free-spirited tendencies just ignorant naivete? We returned home and then were off again. This time we were driving to the Midwest for my grandmother's memorial service. It had been delayed since she had passed away so close to Christmas, and we had family all over the country that wouldn't have been able to attend. I had waited until the last minute to decide if I should go. My father and I still weren't speaking, and I was not in a good headspace, but my grandmother deserved my respect, and I wanted to pay it. Sam went with me. The whole trip was arduous, physically and mentally. It was so cold, and snow blanketed the ground. Going back to my hometown is always a challenge for me. It is the seat of my adolescent pain. It sounds so dramatic, but I can almost feel the oxygen fleeing my body as the space between me and my hometown decreases. I asked my dad if we could have a private conversation before my grandmother's service to clear the air. He politely declined, but said he did want to talk at a time we wouldn't be interrupted. I didn't understand in that moment what the interruption would have been, but I soon found out. It greeted me as I opened the doors to my grandmother's memorial service. I don't want to go into the details because they really aren't that important. What is important is the feeling I had as I left that day. Our reconciliation wasn't a priority. I wasn't a priority. And as hard as I had fought to be, as many times as I had shown up and tried to love through and love past, I wasn't successful. I still couldn't get through. My heart broke all over again, and I felt my mind dissociate from my body. I couldn't keep doing this. Sam flew out for a real estate conference, and I prepared to drive home. When my 92-year-old grandfather, my mom's dad, found out that I was planning to make the drive alone, it's roughly 15 hours, he said, "No granddaughter of mine is going to travel that far by herself." I must have forgotten to mention I had just been in the Middle East by myself. What a man he is, though. He is so cool. If I'm perfectly honest, I was looking forward to a peaceful drive by myself so that I could think and decompress. But when he told me he was coming with, I couldn't refuse. When else would I have this opportunity to travel with him? The drive back was long. It should have taken 15 hours or so, but it ended It should have taken 15 hours or so, but it ended up taking far longer. Traveling with my grandfather slowed things down a bit, but being with him was such a privilege. I think the universe knew that my aching heart needed some fatherly love. I'm crying writing this as I realize how tenderly God shows up for us in our deepest moments of need. We got back to Georgia in one piece, and Grandpa stayed for a few days. I had so much fun taking him to see horses, his favorite animal, and eating cookies. He has the world's biggest sweet tooth, and spending quality time with him. On his last day in Georgia, I got him all checked in at the airport and reluctantly handed him over to the employee that would be taking him safely to his gate. He sat down in the wheelchair. He looked at me, and then he looked at this sweet employee, and then looked back at me again. He started crying, and in between gulps of air, he whispered, "I love you." And he told the employee that I had been so much help to him. I started sobbing in departures at Hartsfield-Jackson as I watched him being wheeled away. I walked back to my car with my sunglasses on and got in. Fortunately, Sam was in the driver's side because I couldn't see through my tears. I was lucky I got in the right vehicle. This was the beginning of my breaking point. By the skin of my teeth, I had been holding it together for the past 6 months, maybe even longer. But saying goodbye that day to my grandfather was the last straw. I'll never forget sitting at my desk in my office, staring at my computer screen in early March, a few days after he left. Tears were streaming down my face, but I couldn't seem to make a sound. It was my rock bottom. I felt the pieces of my life pooling around my ankles. I was 17 again, trying to make sense out of circumstances that were nonsensical. My soul screamed in my direction. I had been intellectualizing my trauma since it had started so many years ago. I thought I had dealt with it. I had been to therapy. I'd had treatment for PTSD. I'd read so many self-help books they were starting to become predictable. The one thing I hadn't done, though, and the one thing I was now powerless to deny, was feeling my pain. It came crashing in with tsunami force and beat me until I was numb with it. Being molested at 5 years old, religious shame, perfectionism, anorexia, ambition, failure, a broken family, lies sold as truth, a new family where mine once was, feeling forgotten, feeling replaced, feeling invisible, frantically searching for worthiness, feeling like I would never, ever be enough. Broken boundaries, broken tapes on repeat in my head, broken dreams, self-loathing, and introspection that made me dizzy with despair. I sunk into it, and for the first time in my life, I felt it all. I was powerless against it this time. It had piled up so high and surrounded me so tight that I couldn't run. I was swallowed by a whale of pain and trauma, just like Jonah. I couldn't intellectualize it away anymore. The only way out was through. It sucked. I was so depressed. The kind of depressed where you feel a sense of relief thinking about accidentally crashing your car into a tree. The dam in my heart and mind that had once been so sound was gone, vanished like a thief in the night. But like Paulo Coelho says, it's always darkest before the dawn. During that period, I thought my pain had broken me. I really didn't think I would ever be the same. But now I understand the purification process. I had to walk through the fire of pain to rid myself of the dross. I couldn't see it as it was happening, but I get it now. In accepting my pain, I made space for my healing. I saw my self-limiting beliefs as clear as day. I saw bits and pieces of what I thought was my identity melt away. I felt exposed. I felt raw. I felt vulnerable. But I also felt free. And I found something that had been buried long, long ago. My voice. I learned what it felt like to speak and own my truth. Not 80% or 90% of it, like I had been sharing for so long. All of it. And I learned to accept it. I stopped fighting it and wishing it away. And in the process, I realized that my deepest pain made way for my greatest strength. We aren't meant to be perfect. We are meant to be whole. And sometimes pain is the path to that wholeness. I think life is messy because we are meant to learn from it. It will squeeze and squeeze and squeeze us until we think we are going to suffocate. And in those last moments where the air is rapidly withdrawing from our lungs, we are faced with a choice: to continue doing what we always have been, or to face the unknown and expand into healthier versions of ourselves. The choice is ours, but in my experience, it's a solo journey. No one can heal for me. No one can save me from myself. No one can take away my truth. No one can take away my pain. No one can break me unless I let them. But I have to choose to do the work of healing. Ultimately, forgiveness isn't for the offender, it's for us. Because when we learn to forgive others, we can open the door to a much, much more difficult process: forgiving ourselves. My pain didn't break me. It led me to the truest version of myself. I had to break down to build back up in a better form. And the result is beautiful. This was one of the hardest years of my life, but I'm so grateful for it. I learned so much. Yes, I'm imperfect, but I'm powerful. I'm a fighter, but I'm gentle. I'm wounded, but I'm alive. All this pain, all these experiences showed me just how strong and brave and courageous and resilient and filled to the brim with love I truly am. And out of that love poured new music and the very words you are reading right now. Life is so very difficult sometimes, but it will only break us if we let it. I am not broken. I am brilliant. And so are you. And that's my story about my breakdown and my breakthrough. And that breaking down, that restructuring, that building back up process is what led me to creating this podcast. You know, I've been interested in self-discovery and self-actualization for a long time. I've always been somebody who is introspective and empathic and aware of myself and my actions. But I had never felt my own pain the way that I felt my own pain last year. And walking through it was such a profound experience that it made me feel like I was playing small. I wasn't reaching out and grabbing on to my full potential. And so this podcast is an extension of my healing. It's an extension of what I believe to be my purpose in this world, which a huge part of that is taking pain and transforming it into something beautiful, like a modern day alchemist. Again, my friends, we are just beginning. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and I promise that as we continue on this journey together, more will be uncovered, more truth will be revealed, more love will be shared. For more information about this podcast or me, please visit JacquelineSteeleInternational.com/self-discovery-pod. And if you want to continue this conversation outside of the podcast, please find me on Instagram @JacquelineSteele. May we know who we are so that we can go out into the world and be who we are. You are loved and you are cherished. Light and love and peace.